The egg cracked 3 days late. That alone was a bad sign. Among the Dracari, timing was everything. A hatchling that could not break free of its shell on schedule was already behind. Already weak. Already wrong. The other eggs in the clutch had cracked on the second morning of the warm season, clean and fast. Each hatchling had pushed through with strong legs and sharp claws, shaking shell dust from their scales and lifting their heads into the highland air of Orvist with a cry that echoed off the stone nest walls. Then, on the fifth morning, when the elders had nearly stopped watching, the last egg moved. It cracked slowly, unevenly. The hatchling inside pushed in the wrong places first, working against herself for nearly an hour before a small golden bronze nose broke through the top. She pulled herself out not with a dramatic cry, but with a quiet grunt, and she landed on the stone floor of the nest and just sat there blinking. Small, very small. Her wings were folded against her back, but they did not sit right. The left one bent at a shallow angle, as if the joint had not quite finished forming. Her scales were bright, almost too bright, a warm gold with bronze along the spine. Pretty, in a way that did not matter here. The elder who ran the nest was a large Dracari named Voritha's grandmother. She was old enough that her own scales had gone to a deep iron color. She walked around the hatchling once, slowly, and said nothing for a long time. The other hatchlings had already been named, already been fed, already been assigned a trainer. This one did not get a name that morning. She was called the runt in the way that things get called by what they are when no one expects them to matter. The nest workers fed her last and gave her the smallest portion. She ate it quickly, like she knew not to be slow about the things she was allowed to have. For 9 days, she lived in the nest. She was not mistreated, exactly. She was simply overlooked. The other hatchlings trained in the yard below, learning to spread their wings and feel the wind. She watched from a ledge, her crooked wing twitching each time the others lifted even slightly off the ground. On the 10th night, the predators came. Orvist had many things that hunted at night. A pack of ground stalkers, 8-legged, fast, drawn by the scent of young creatures, found the lower wall of the nesting ground. The adults fought them off. They always did. But in the chaos, the hatchlings scattered. When morning came, 7 of the 9 hatchlings were found within the grounds. 2 were missing. One was found by midday, huddled in a rock crevice 200 meters from the outer wall. The runt was not found at all. The elders searched for 1 day, then half a day more. Then one of the older warriors said what everyone was already thinking. She was small, she could not fly, she had probably not run far enough or fast enough. The wild of Orvist did not wait for slow things. They stopped searching on the 3rd day. They did not know that she was alive. She had run further than any of them expected. Nearly a full kilometer from the nest before she had wedged herself into a hollow under a fallen ridge stone and gone perfectly still, flattening her body the way something small learns to do when it knows it cannot fight. She had stayed still through 2 nights and 1 full day until the last sounds of pursuit faded. On the 2nd morning she came out, hungry and alone and completely lost. Orvist stretched in every direction. Hills folded into each other in long, slow waves. The sky was pale violet at dawn, and the wind smelled of mineral dust and something she had no name for, something alive, moving, steady. She followed the smell because she had nothing else to follow. It led her through a dry creek bed and over a ridge of flat stones and down into a shallow valley where the grass grew in long pale threads. She moved slowly, stopping often to listen. Her wing dragged a little at the left side, but she had already begun to compensate, shifting her weight so she moved in a straight line without thinking about it. At the bottom of the valley she stopped. There was a human. She had never seen one in person. She had heard of them. Everyone in the nest had heard of them. The elders spoke about humans the way they spoke about weather. Present, unpredictable, not something you planned around, but something you accounted for. This one was tall and thin in the way humans were, with the kind of frame that suggested it had been put together for walking and little else. It wore gear, layered, practical, worn at the edges, and it carried a heavy pack on its back and a long scanning rod in one hand. It moved at a steady pace across the valley floor, not fast, not slow, just constant. She crouched in the grass and watched it go. It did not look at her. It did not stop. It just walked. She waited until it had crossed most of the valley before she stood up and, very carefully, began to follow. She did not know why. She was not sure it was safe. But the smell she had followed all morning was coming from that human. Something warm and steady and not threatening. Something that moved through the world without cruelty. And she had nothing else and nowhere to go. She kept 200 meters between them. She was quiet. She was careful. The human never looked back. Neither of them knew yet that they had just begun a very long walk. His name was Davin Rail, and he had been hired to walk. That was not exactly how the Galactic Survey Bureau described the job. The contract used words like terrain analyst and frontier mapping specialist. But when you stripped away the formal language, what it meant was this: go to the unmapped western reaches of Orvist, put one foot in front of the other for several months, and record everything your instruments pick up. Davin had done this kind of work for 11 years on 4 different planets. He was good at it because he did not need much and he did not stop easily. Bad weather did not bother him. Loneliness did not bother him. Sir Feet bothered him considerably, but he had learned to walk through that too. He had no idea he had company. For the first week, he noticed nothing unusual. He logged his data, made camp at dusk, ate his rations, slept, and rose before light to walk again. His survey logs were precise and dry. Wind speed, soil density, elevation change, flora classification, fauna sightings, 2 types of grazing creatures, 1 burrowing species, a bird-like thing with 4 wings that followed his camp for a day and then left. No mention of a small golden bronze dragon trailing him through the grass. She was that good at staying hidden. Suri, she had not yet been given that name, but she would be, eventually, had grown up in a nest where the rule was simple. If you are small, you are quiet, and if you are quiet, you survive. Those 9 days of being overlooked had taught her something the stronger hatchlings never had to learn. She knew exactly how to be invisible. She moved when he moved. She stopped when he stopped. She slept in short intervals, always keeping one eye toward him, always upwind, so she could track him by smell even in the dark. On the 3rd night, she saw what came for his camp. Orvist's plains had a species of scavenger, low, 6-limbed, with wide pale eyes built for dark, that hunted by tracking heat signatures. They were not dangerous to a healthy adult, but they were persistent, and they had a habit of investigating camps in groups, knocking over supplies, contaminating food stores, sometimes biting if cornered. 3 of them had been circling Davin's camp for an hour, getting closer each pass. Suri moved without deciding to move. She slipped around the edge of the camp in a wide arc, came up behind the nearest scavenger, and hissed. A sharp, low sound that carried the particular frequency that Drakari Young used to warn off threats. To small creatures, it registered as something much larger than she was. The scavengers fled. Davin, asleep in his tent, heard nothing. In the morning he wrote in his log, "Camp quiet. No scavenger activity despite suitable habitat. Lucky placement, perhaps." It happened again on the 5th night. And the 7th. Each time she drove them off before they came close enough to wake him. Each time he slept through it. Each time his log recorded nothing more than mild surprise at how peaceful the nights were out here. By the 2nd week, she had begun to relax slightly. The fear she had carried since the night of the predator attack, that low humming alertness that never fully switched off, softened just a little. Not because she felt safe, exactly, but because following him had a rhythm to it. A pattern. And patterns were easier to be inside than to be outside of. She ate what she could find. Orvist's plains had small burrowing creatures, quick and fat, not difficult to catch if you were patient. She was patient. She drank from the same streams he stopped at, always waiting until he had moved on. She watched him constantly, and she learned things. He ate at the same times every day. He stopped walking exactly when the light changed. He talked to himself. Not much, just small comments about what he was recording, things like noting the wind direction or observing that a particular plant species grew thicker near water. She could not understand the words, but she understood the tone. Calm, thinking, not afraid. She had never heard a creature move through the world so calmly that it narrated the whole experience without raising its voice. Around mile 200, the terrain changed. The plains gave way to a region of dense fungal forest, tall pale columns with wide flat tops that filtered the light into something dim and gray-green. The ground was soft here, almost spongy. Sound carried differently. She had to move more carefully to stay quiet. Davin slowed too, scanning more. He seemed to find the forest interesting rather than threatening. He stopped often to take readings from the column trunks, pressing his instruments against them with the focused attention of someone who is being paid to notice things. She noticed, around mile 230, that he had developed a limp. Not a bad one, just a favoring of the left foot, a slight adjustment in how he planted each step. He did not stop walking. He did not make camp early. He took out a medical wrap from his pack one evening, applied it to his ankle without much fuss, and kept going the next morning at the same pace. She watched him do this from a stand of pale column trunks 40 meters back, and something shifted in her that she had no language for. She had been following him because she had nowhere else to go. She had been protecting his camp because the habits of the nest were hard to break. Small things protected their space. But this was different. This was something else. He had been hurt, and he had not stopped. He was alone, and he had not panicked. He moved through a world that did not particularly care about him, and he kept going anyway, logging his notes, eating his rations, sleeping his short nights, rising before light. She had thought she was following him. She was beginning to understand she was choosing him. The distress signal came through on a Tuesday. Davin almost missed it. The fungal forest had been playing with his receiver for 2 days, the thick columns scattering signals in unpredictable directions. But the ping was persistent, a short repeating pulse on the emergency frequency that the Galactic Survey Bureau required all registered travelers on Orvis to carry. He checked his map. The signal was coming from a ravine about 4 kilometers east of his current route, off his survey path, out of his way. He stood there for a moment, looking at the blinking marker on his screen, and then he turned east and started walking. He did not make a record of this decision. It was not a complicated one. Suri had been 30 meters back when he changed direction. She stopped, tilted her head, and watched him veer off the path he had been keeping for weeks. Then she followed. The ravine was a narrow cut in the landscape, stone walls on both sides dropping down to a flat floor where a transport vehicle sat at a bad angle. One of its 4 undercarriage pods had buckled on the uneven ground, and the whole thing listed to the right like a creature with a broken leg. Clustered around it were 6 Hesari. The Hesari were small, about the height of a human child but broader, with wide flat faces and large eyes designed for detail work at close range. They were traders, common on Orvist's eastern routes, known for moving light goods between the outer settlements. They were not built for emergencies. 2 of them were attempting to fix the buckled pod with tools that were clearly wrong for the job. The others stood in a group and spoke to each other in rapid, low tones. Davin announced himself from the top of the ravine so he did not startle them, then climbed down. Suri did not follow him into the ravine. She went to the eastern ridge instead, above and behind, and settled into a crouch between 2 outcroppings of stone where she could see the whole scene below. She watched. Davin crouched beside the damaged pod, looked at it for a while without touching it, then opened his own pack. He had a multi-tool kit, survey gear, but adaptable. He and the 2 Hesari who had been attempting the repair exchanged a wordless moment of understanding, and then all 3 of them got to work. It took 2 hours. Davin did not speak Hesari, and they had only a few words of the common trade tongue between them. So most of the repair happened through gestures and pointing and the universal language of holding things in place while another person tightened a bolt. When the pod finally clicked back into position and the transport leveled out, one of the Hesari made a sound like a short trill that Davin took to be relief. He shared his rations with them while they tested the vehicle. They shared something from their own stores in return, a soft-wrapped food he did not recognize but that tasted faintly of salt and something warm. They ate together on the floor of the ravine in the particular comfortable silence of strangers who have just fixed a difficult problem. Then one of the Hesari, the oldest, judging by the deep silver around his eyes, went very still. He was looking at the eastern ridge. He made a quiet sound, and the others looked. Then they all went still. Davin turned. Suri was on the ridge above, sitting between the 2 stones, watching. She had been watching the whole time. She had simply not noticed that from below, with the angle of the light changing as afternoon came in, she was perfectly visible. She did not run. She looked down at them, all of them. Her golden bronze scales caught the light and held it. Her crooked left wing twitched once and went still. Davin turned back. His voice was low and even. She been up there long? The silver-eyed Hesari held up both hands, widespread, all fingers, and then held them up again. 20 minutes. Maybe more. David nodded slowly. He reached into his pack and took out a piece of dried protein ration, the flat square kind, not flavorful, but dense. He stood, walked to the base of the ravine wall, and placed it on a flat stone there, in the open. Then he walked back and sat down. He did not look at the ridge. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved quickly. For minutes passed. Then there was a small sound. Careful claws on stone, and Suri came down the ravine wall one step at a time, testing each foothold. She reached the bottom, crossed the floor slowly, took the ration from the stone, and ate it in 2 bites. Then she sat and looked at David directly. It was the first time they had looked at each other. He had a wide face, calm eyes, weathered in the way of someone who spent most of their time outdoors. He looked at her without surprise or fear or excitement, just the same steady attention he had given the broken transport pod. He said something in his language, quietly. She did not understand the words. The silver-eyed Hesari elder spoke then, slowly, in trade tongue. David understood enough to follow. The elder said that among those who knew the Drakari, those who traded near their lands, who had studied their customs, it was understood that a hatchling did not follow a creature by accident. A hatchling that followed was a hatchling that had chosen. And a hatchling that had chosen was a hatchling that had taken on a ward. Not a companion. Not a pet. A ward. Something to be guarded. He asked David how long the small dragon had been following him. David thought about the quiet camps. The scavengers that never came. 20 nights of peaceful sleep in country that should not have been peaceful. He said, slowly, about 300 miles. The elder was silent for a long time. Then he said, she has been protecting you. The whole time. And you did not know. David looked at Suri. Suri looked back at David. He picked up another piece of ration, held it out flat on his palm. She walked forward and took it, and this time she did not step back. She sat beside him, close enough that he could have reached out and touched her, and looked out at the ravine walls the way he looked at everything. Steady, calm, not afraid. He asked her, very quietly, how long she had been out there alone. She could not answer, but she did not move away either. He picked up his pack when it was time to leave. He climbed out of the ravine. He walked west, back toward his survey route. She walked beside him, not behind, beside. The Hesari elder watched them go until they disappeared over the ridge, and then he stood there a while longer, not speaking, because some things did not need a comment. Word traveled fast on Orvist when it needed to. The Hesari traders filed a standard route report when they reached the nearest settlement, as all registered travelers were required to do. The report mentioned the repair, the good fortune of a passing surveyor, and one additional note. A Drakari hatchling, golden bronze, left wing malformed, had been observed in open terrain near the Western Survey Corridor, traveling in the company of a human male. The note was meant to be routine, a wildlife observation, something for the settlement's fauna tracking board. It reached the wrong eyes within 36 hours. A Drakari scouting patrol had been crossing the same region for unrelated reasons. A border marker needed resetting. A task 2 warriors had been sent to handle and return from quickly. Their commander was a warrior named Vorith, young for his rank, large even by Drakari standards. His scales were the color of deep green river stone, and his wings were fully developed and broad. He was the kind of Drakari who had never once been called a runt. He received the fauna report through the shared territory network, and he read it 3 times. All Drakari hatchlings carried a biological signal marker, embedded in the cartilage behind the left ear at birth. It allowed the nest to track wandering young. It also meant that any registered Drakari patrol with the right equipment could locate a stray hatchling if one was ever recorded in the field. Vorith had the right equipment. He adjusted his patrol's route. They found the tracks on the second day, 2 sets, walking parallel. 1 set large, boot-soled, human. 1 set small, fur-toed, clawed, walking side by side, not one following the other. Side by side. Vorith's second-in-command said nothing. He did not need to. The expression on Vorith's face said everything. They followed the tracks for 3 hours and then came over a shallow rise and saw them below. The human walking at his steady pace across a wide, open stretch of pale grassland, and beside him, half his height in gold in the afternoon light, the hatchling. Vorith signaled his patrol to spread wide and come down from 3 directions. David heard them before he saw them. He had been on enough survey walks in alien territory to know the sound of deliberate approach. He slowed, did not stop, scanned the ridgeline. 4 Drakari warriors came over it. Then 2 more on the right. Vorth himself came down the center, walking directly toward them, unhurried, the way things walk when they are not worried about the outcome. Suri heard them a full minute before Davin had. She had already moved when the first warrior crested the ridge, shifted from beside Davin to just in front of him, 1 step ahead, her body angled so that her right side faced the approaching warriors and Davin was slightly behind her right shoulder. Davin noticed this and did not move forward. He stayed where he was and let her stand. Vorth stopped 10 meters away. He looked at the hatchling. He looked at the human. He looked at the hatchling again. His face was not readable in any way that Davin could map, but the silence had a texture to it. Then Vorth spoke, not in trade tongue, in Drakari, which Davin did not speak. One of the other warriors moved to translate, a younger one who had clearly been posted with the patrol for exactly this kind of situation. He spoke carefully. The commander, he said, was ordering the hatchling to return with the patrol to the nearest Drakari territory, and the human was to be held for questioning regarding unlawful interaction with protected Drakari young. Davin said, calmly, I didn't seek her out. She followed me. The warrior translated. Vortha's response came back, it does not matter. A hatchling in proximity to a non-Drakari is a violation of nest law regardless of circumstance. The hatchling would be returned. The human would be detained. Suri opened her wings. The left one did not open fully, it never did, but the right one spread wide and the left came out at its shallow angle, and she held them both open and she growled. It was a small sound from a small body, but it carried perfectly in the open air, and it was a sound that carried something older than the words any of them were using. A warning. A line. Every warrior in the patrol went still. Vorth stared at her. A hatchling, barely past her first month, crooked wing, smaller than his forearm, was standing her ground against 6 trained warriors. Against him. The silence stretched. Then Davin stepped forward, not in front of Suri, beside her, 1 step to her left, so they stood even. He spoke to Vorth directly. His voice was even, no aggression in it, just wait. She kept me alive for 300 miles of open country. She drove off scavengers while I slept. She came out into the open today for the first time, and she walked next to me instead of behind me. And that means something I don't fully understand yet, but it matters. He paused. I'm not going to stand back while something happens to her. The translator worked through it quietly. Vorth listened with his eyes on Davin the whole time. A long pause. The wind moved across the grassland. Vorth said something short. The translator almost did not translate it. Then he did, reluctantly. The commander said, the hatchling was not supposed to survive. She was the run of the clutch. She had been given up for lost. Davin looked at Suri. She was still holding her wings open, still watching Vorth, but her weight had shifted slightly back toward Davin's side. He said, yeah, turns out she had somewhere to be. Nothing happened for a moment. Then Vorth made a sharp motion with his hand, and his patrol held position. He turned and walked a short distance away and opened a communication device and began speaking into it. He was not detaining them. He was not taking Suri. He was calling someone higher. The young translator looked at Davin and said, quietly and entirely off the record, he is calling the High Nest. This has not happened before. Davin looked down at Suri. She had folded her wings. She looked back up at him with that flat, direct gaze she had, the one that had no apology in it and no fear. He said quietly, I think we're about to have a longer walk than I planned. She sat down beside his foot, not touching him, just close. It was, for the moment, enough. The High Nest was built into the eastern mountains of Orvis the way a tree grows into rock, not placed there, but become there, over centuries, stone fitted to stone until the structure was both building and mountain at once. Davin had seen it on survey maps, but maps did not carry the weight of the actual thing. It was enormous. It was old. Every surface was carved with the kind of detail that meant someone had spent their entire life working on a single wall. He and Suri were brought inside by Vorth's patrol, not roughly, but not kindly. Escorted, the way things are escorted when the people doing the escorting have not yet decided what they think about you. The chamber they were brought to was large and high-ceilinged, open to the mountain air through a series of wide arches along the far wall. 7 elders were seated in a curved arrangement at the far end. Their scales ranged from deep brown to the iron gray of extreme age. They did not speak immediately. They looked at Suri for a long time first. Suri looked back. She sat next to Davin's left leg without touching it, upright, and she did not look away from the elders. Whatever else she was not shy. A translator sat to Davin's right. Not the young warrior from before, but a formal one. A Drakari who had clearly done this work for many years and had the particular stillness of someone who had learned to carry other people's words without adding to them. The head elder spoke first. She was the oldest. Her scales had gone to pale gray, almost white at the edges, and her eyes were a very dark amber. Her voice was slow and deliberate, and the translator kept pace. She explained the rite of severance. When a hatchling formed a bond with a non-Drakari, through circumstance, through error, through whatever unplanned thing the world produced, the old law required a severing. The bond was young. Young bonds could be broken cleanly if the two parties were separated before the connection deepened past a certain point. The rite was simple. The bonded one would be brought before the council, the situation would be explained, and the bonded one would choose to walk away, to leave the hatchling in the care of the nest, to not return. The bond would weaken within a few months without contact. The hatchling would be absorbed back into nest life. Every creature that had ever sat in this chamber, the head elder said, had agreed to the rite. Because it was the reasonable thing. Because it was the safe thing. Because the nest was offering to take the problem off their hands cleanly and without consequence. When the translator finished, the chamber was quiet. Davin asked one question. What happens to Suri if I walk away? A pause. The head elder and 2 of the others exchanged a brief look. Then she answered honestly. The hatchling would return to the nest. Her clutch had already been placed with trainers. She would be reassigned where possible, but given her size and the state of her wing, it was likely she would be placed in a support role rather than a field one. She did not say the rest. She did not need to. What she had not said, in the space between the words, was that a hatchling who had bonded and been severed often did not thrive in the nest afterward. The bond left a kind of absence. Small creatures in absences did not do well. Davin heard all of it. He said, Then I don't walk away. The chamber came alive. Not loudly. Drakari did not tend toward loud, but there was a sharp shift in the air, a series of short exchanges between the elders, movements that in any species read as surprise and agitation. The head elder held up one hand for quiet and got it. She said, carefully, that no non-Drakari had ever refused the rite. Davin said he understood that. She said that refusing had consequences, that the law did not have a provision for refusal, that this created a significant problem. Davin said, Then we work on the problem. I'm not leaving her. Vorth spoke then. He had been standing to one side of the chamber, part of the formal escort, and it was not usual for an escort warrior to speak during elder proceedings. But he spoke, and no one stopped him. He told the council what he had seen on the grassland. Not the technical details, not the nest law, not the treaty implications. He told them what it had looked like to see a hatchling, a runt, a lost one, a creature the nest had given up, open her wings in front of 6 warriors and hold her ground. He told them what it had looked like to see the human step beside her, not in front, not behind, but beside, and hold his ground too. He said, I have trained for 11 years. I know what it looks like when a creature is protecting something because it has been ordered to. And I know what it looks like when a creature is protecting something because it has chosen to. He paused. Both of them chose. When he was done, the chamber was very still. The head elder looked at Suri for a long moment. Then she said something that she clearly had not planned to say when the session began, because she said it slowly, as if finding the words as she went. The old law, she said, was written to sever false bonds. Bonds of capture, bonds of force, bonds that formed because a hatchling had no other option and therefore was not truly choosing. The law said nothing, she said, about a true bond. Because the people who wrote the law had not believed a true bond between a Drakari and a non-Drakari was possible. The council was split. 3 for the right, 3 uncertain, 1 silent. Then Suri stood up. She walked across the chamber floor. It was a wide floor, open stone, and her claws made small sounds on it in the silence. She crossed the whole length of it, and she came to stand next to Davin, and she turned so she was facing the council, and she leaned, very slightly, just her shoulder against his leg. The silent elder, the oldest one, stood. She said 4 words in Dracari. The translator's voice, when it came, was very quiet. The rite is withdrawn. Nobody in the chamber spoke. Vorith looked at Davin for a long moment, and then he gave one slow nod, the kind that does not need anything added to it. Davin looked down at Suri. She was already looking up at him. He said nothing. Neither did she. They had been communicating without words for 300 miles already. It was enough. Orvist's western coast smelled like salt and stone and something faintly electric from the mineral content in the water. The cliffs were pale gray, dropping straight to a dark sea that moved in long, slow swells. The sky above was wide and cloudless, and the color of old bronze late in the afternoon. Davin stood at the cliff edge and looked out. He had been walking for 94 days. He had covered 711 miles by the survey instruments count, slightly more than the contract required, because of the detour to the Hesari ravine and the time spent at the High Nest. His boots had been resold once at a supply depot and were beginning to need it again. He had gone through 4 sets of recording cells, 2 water filtration units, and more dried protein rations than he ever wanted to think about again. The western coast of Orvist was now mapped. The survey was complete. He sat down on a flat rock near the cliff edge and opened his data recorder. He transmitted the completed survey package to the Galactic Survey Bureau's regional receiver, a process that took about 90 seconds, and then he opened the log for a final entry. Suri sat beside him. She sat the way she always sat now, close enough to be clearly present, far enough to not crowd him. Her golden bronze scales had deepened slightly over the 3 months of travel. More bronze in the spine now, the gold still bright on the underside of her wings. Her left wing still did not open fully, but when she stretched it, and she had started stretching it in the mornings the way Davin stretched his back, it came out further than it had at the start. Davin looked at her for a moment and then looked back at his recorder. He wrote, "Survey complete. 711 miles. 94 days. Terrain cataloged across 14 classified biome types. All data transmitted to Bureau. No significant equipment loss." He paused. He added, "Encountered 1 Dracari hatchling. Female, approximately 3 months of age by the time of first confirmed contact. Species, Dracari. Status, permanent company." He sat there a while after that, not writing anything else, just watching the sea. Suri picked herself up after a few minutes and walked to the very edge of the cliff and looked down at the water. The wind came up from below and hit her wings, and she spread them. Right one full, left one at its angle, and held them open and let the wind push through them. It lifted the edges of her scales and made a soft sound, almost like the pages of something large turning. She had never glided. Her wing made it impossible to get true lift. But in moments like this, with the wind coming straight up from below, she could feel what it would feel like. She stayed like that for a while. Davin watched her and said nothing. When she came back and sat beside him, he reached out slowly, the way he had learned, without sudden movement, giving her time to decide, and rested his hand lightly on top of her head between the 2 small ridges at the back of her skull. She went still. Then she leaned into it, just slightly. It was the first time he had touched her. 3 months and 700 miles, and it was the first time. He took his hand back after a moment, and they both looked at the sea again. 3 days later, the Bureau acknowledged his survey transmission and approved his payment. Attached to the approval was a message from the Galactic Survey Bureau's legal department asking him to confirm a secondary communication they had received, because they were not sure it was meant for them. The secondary communication was from the Dracari High Nest. It was formal, precise, and written in the tone of something that had been drafted carefully by people who understood that they were doing something that had not been done before. It formally notified the Bureau that one Davin Rail, human, survey walker, registered operating number 7 Orvist 44, had been recognized by the Dracari High Council as a ward-bonded companion. It listed the rights and protections this carried under Dracari law. It requested that this status be recorded in all relevant interstellar registries. The Bureau's legal department sent the confirmation Davin asked for. Then someone in the office forwarded the exchange to a contact at the Hesari News Cooperative because it seemed like the kind of thing that should be known about. The Hesari ran the story first. Then a human outlet picked it up. Then the interstellar trade feed. Then 17 other networks in quick succession, Because the story had the particular quality that certain true stories have, the kind that sounds made up, but isn't, and sounds simple, but isn't that either. The headline, in its most shared form, read, "Baby Dragon followed the same human for 700 miles. Nobody knew she was protecting him." Davin did not see any of this immediately. He had spent the days after the survey transmission resting at the coastal supply station, sleeping more than he had in 3 months, eating food that was not dried protein rations, letting his feet recover. Suri had spent the same days investigating every corner of the supply station with the systematic thoroughness of a creature who had been living in open wilderness and found the concept of enclosed spaces genuinely interesting. He saw the headline when a bureau logistics officer forwarded it to him with a message that just said, "Is this you?" He read the article. It was mostly accurate. A few details were wrong. The distance was listed as exactly 700 miles, which was slightly off, and the article described Suri as a rare species, which was not quite right. She was not rare, she was just lost, but the shape of it was true. He looked across the room. Suri had found a high shelf and was sitting on it, looking down at him with her usual steady expression. He showed her the screen. She sniffed it. Then she sneezed, a small hard sound that bounced off the station walls, and went back to looking out the high window at the coast. Davin laughed. It came out before he decided to do it. It echoed off the walls, and he let it go. Nobody had told Suri that a runt was not supposed to survive. Nobody had told her that hatchlings did not choose their own wards. Nobody had told her that following something for 700 miles across unmapped territory was not a thing that small broken-winged creatures did. So she had done it. And nobody had told Davin that 700 miles of walking alone was the kind of thing a person did alone. Nobody had told him that a surveyor's job was to map the land and nothing else, that he was not supposed to turn east for a distress signal that was not his problem, that he was not supposed to stand beside a hatchling in front of a council of elders and refuse to move. So he had done that too. Outside, the western sea of Orvist moved in long, slow swells against the pale cliffs, the same as it had before any of them arrived, and the same as it would long after. The wind came up from the water. Above, through the high window, a pale bronze shape spread her wings and let it through.